We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here for the final event of this instalment of Fight Island on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi. This is UFC 254, and what a card we have for Saturday afternoon and evening. That's right, this event will be live during our afternoon in the UK with the main card starting at 7 PM. I cannot wait. But just before we get into the breakdowns, a quick reminder that the Golden Gamble Challenge is still running over at MMAPlay365, but this is the final event of this challenge. If you missed the details of the challenge, we have cut our annual subscription price in half for you, 50% off, so it's now just $150 instead of the usual $300. However, it gets better. If the official bets, so the bets that I personally play and track third party at betmma.tips, do not profit after the 5 UFC Fight Island events combined, then anybody who has purchased the annual subscription during this run at Fight Island will get 100% of their money back, and we will keep your subscription active for the remainder of that 12 months too. Either we profit on the official bets or you get that annual subscription for free. And when you really think about it, if we do profit on those official bets, you will likely have made that $150 back anyway. Last week was a rough event for us from a betting perspective. This means that we are now only plus 1.31 units with only one event in the challenge remaining. If you want the opportunity to try and get your annual subscription for free, then this is your last chance. So go to MMAplay365.com and add that annual subscription to your basket. And let's go, let's break down some fights. In the main event of the night, in the lightweight division, we've got the champion versus interim champion. We have Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje. Khabib is currently the minus 330 favourite. The comeback on Gaethje at plus 270 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I know this might sound a little strange and I've never spoke about a betting line this wide in this way before, but I actually think that there's value either side here, and I'll explain what I mean. From an underdog perspective with Justin Gaethje, I feel that a line of plus 270 is very, very steep for a fighter with elite qualities. And this is a fight where I don't necessarily think he's in a bad stylistic fight either. A lot of fighters are when they face Khabib, but if any man is going to beat Khabib Nurmagomedov, I do feel that it's going to be someone with the skill set and qualities of Justin Gaethje. So from a plus 270 perspective, I definitely think that if you are fading Khabib this time around, that this is probably the right time to do that. However, this is Khabib Nurmagomedov that we're talking about. I think he's a fighter that will end up retiring undefeated. I do think that he beats Justin Gaethje, and whilst the line is too high to play straight, in my opinion, I feel that he could add a lot of value in a parlay for this card. So I do see value in that parlay with Khabib Nurmagomedov. And on the flip side, if you're playing Justin Gaethje as a dog, I think there's value there for sure. I know that sounds a little bit strange that I'm saying that there's value on either side, but either side here can be playable in the right way. I think the Khabib Nurmagomedov tickets are going to cash on the night, but like I say, the elite qualities of Justin Gaethje at plus 270, I totally understand it if you're going to part with your money on that side for sure. As for where the betting line moves during fight week, I did anticipate money coming in on Justin Gaethje. I honestly thought that we might even see Khabib move to minus 275, maybe even minus 250, but as always, as usual, apart from the Conor McGregor fight, the money is coming in on Khabib each day that goes past. And, you know, I do understand it. I have briefly touched upon it, and I do think it's the Khabib tickets that cash on the night. So I do understand that line movement. I think at some point, though, it will hit a brick wall. I don't think we'll see Gaethje at plus 300, plus 330, even plus 350. I think at that point, we will start seeing surges of money coming in on Justin Gaethje. But as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I do think that if Khabib ever loses in his career, it's probably going to be on Saturday night. From a stylistic perspective, you've got Gaethje that's got this wrestling background. We don't always see the background. In fact, we've never really seen him on his back for long periods of time, so that's a little bit of an unknown for sure. But the striking of Justin Gaethje is something that's so dangerous, whether that be his power right hand or whether that be the low kicks from hell. The dude is such a dangerous striker, and he can really mix it up and down the body as well. And this is going to be a very interesting thing, because there is going to be moments in this fight where Khabib is judging the range, getting his reads in, looking at when he can probably try and close the distance, the safest way to get a hold of Gaethje. But in those moments, it's going to be a striking battle. And although I don't think Khabib is a bad striker, in fact, I actually think he's quite an underrated striker. Not many fighters go out there and start dropping Conor McGregor. So for me, Khabib is a decent striker. But in the long periods of this fight, if it does take place on the feet, then Gaethje's really going to start teeing off on him. And I think Gaethje will hurt him to the legs. And then obviously the power right hand could always be a power right hand that drops Khabib. But again, Khabib's durable as well. So I'm not sure if Gaethje can take him out, but to be honest with you, I don't think that this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. Obviously, all fights start standing, all rounds start standing, so although there's definitely going to be some striking elements in this fight, I just feel it's only a matter of time before Khabib gets those reads, he starts cutting off the cage, he gets Gaethje going backwards, and once Khabib gets his hands locked around Gaethje, that grip that he's got is just an insane grip. It's an elite grip, and actually I think the grip of wrestlers isn't something that's spoken about as much as it should be. There's a few fighters in the UFC that I believe have just got solid grips, and grips that are just ridiculously hard to break. Khabib's one of them. The other two off the top of my head that I can think of is Gregor Gillespie, Curtis Blades. These are fighters that when they get hold of their opponents and drag them down or take them down, even if their opponents get back up to the feet, the grip is still going to be there, the arms are still going to be around the body, the hands are still going to be clasped together, and if you cannot break that grip, you're not going to be able to stop the takedowns after takedowns, which is what these fighters, and Khabib especially, is an absolute master of. I think Gaethje is going to have real problems here. We have seen Gaethje defend takedowns. We have seen him with a big sprawl. He's crazy, rolling backwards, back up to his feet. And honestly, it does seem like he does spot these takedowns coming. And like I say, the reactions to the takedowns are just crazy. He does not want to be taken down or spend time on his back. But these are shots that are coming from the middle of the cage, coming out in the open. And the problem with that in this fight is Khabib doesn't take fighters down in that way normally. Khabib's the type of fighter that will look to close the distance. He cuts off the cage really well, and what that does is prevent the opponents from finding exits and angles away from the cage, and what it does is force them backwards. Once they get close to the cage, that's when Khabib will shoot, but he won't shoot to get the takedown first time. He'll just shoot to clinch up, close the distance, get his arms around the body of his opponent, and then he can start chain wrestling and look to see what's best for him to try and take the fighter down to the mat. And that's something that we haven't seen Justin Gaethje really deal with. So unless Justin Gaethje is an elite defensive wrestler in that perspective, I just don't think that he's going to be able to prevent takedowns. I don't think you can assume in this fight that Justin Gaethje isn't going to get taken down. I think he is going to get taken down. And although, and credit to Justin Gaethje, he is a completely different fighter to what he used to be. And one of those improvements and developments has come in the gas tank and the cardio. He just seems to hold so much more gas than what he used to be able to. But something you've got to take into consideration is those fights where he's holding and retaining that gas are fights where it's predominantly going his way. He's able to dictate the pace. He's able to dictate the range. He's the one that's making the aggressive decisions, when to come in, when to slide out of range. I don't think he's going to be able to dictate the pace and the range in this fight. Maybe for moments early in the fight, early in round one, but I think the longer this fight goes on, when we're starting to see the end of round one, round two, round three, I think it's going to be Khabib that's dictating that pace. And once he starts taking Justin Gaethje down, mauling him on the mat, Gaethje will be getting back up to his feet in movements, Khabib will be taking him right back down. I do think that suffocation, that grinding, relentless style of Khabib is going to suck the life out of Gaethje, just like it does every other fighter that he fights. And I think we will see that cardio diminish quite early, and much earlier than we have seen it in recent fights of Justin Gaethje. So I think the takedowns are going to come in this fight. I think Khabib's going to put on the performance that he always puts on with takedowns, wrestling, Dagestani handcuffs, just a relentless, grinding, grueling style. And I think the longer the fight goes on, the more likely it is that Khabib is not only going to win the fight, but it'll be more likely that he finishes the fight the longer it goes on. I honestly think in this fight, the first round is absolutely crucial, and I think it's going to tell us a lot about where this fight takes place and potentially who actually wins the fight, because from Justin Gaethje's perspective, if he comes out hard and lands a few really hard low kicks, really hurts Khabib's legs, stifles that movement, then he's got a great chance of advancing, putting the pressure on, being aggressive, and not only winning the fight, but getting Khabib out of there as well. However, if it's Khabib that comes out there, deals with the striking relatively well, then starts getting takedowns, I think that's just going to be a bad night for Gaethje from that moment onwards. I don't think Khabib is going to allow himself to get pieced up by Justin Gaethje early on before those takedowns start. I think he's going to be smart. I think he's going to keep himself safe. I think he's going to get the correct reads in. I think he'll start cutting off Justin Gaethje, cutting off the cage, stopping any lateral movement. And from that point, the takedowns will come and we'll see that beautiful Khabib Nurmagomedov performance that we see time and time again. I'm picking Khabib Nurmagomedov to defend the lightweight world championship and still the UFC lightweight champion. And in the next fight in the co-main event, we've got a great fight in the middleweight division with potentially championship implications as well. We've got Robert Whittaker versus Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier is currently the -115 favourite, with the comeback on Whittaker at -105 as the slight underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I think if you've got a solid read on this fight, then either side is bettable. And I think you are going to be able to make an argument for either side as well. As for where the betting line moves, I do think that we see the line flip come fight night. I think Robert Whittaker's name, the fact that he's been in there with the best in the division for a number of years now, and at -105, even plus 100 still at some books at the time that I'm recording this podcast, I do feel that people will hop onto that side, so much so that the line will go through the pick'em, cause the flip. I do expect to see Cannonier at -105 or plus 100 himself come fight night on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out though, I think this is a really great fight, and from the offset, I thought it was a great fight for Whittaker, set up perfectly for him, somebody that he might even be able to style on. But actually, after watching tape, I think that Cannonier is a very dangerous guy in this middleweight division for a number of reasons. Firstly, the fact that he came down from heavyweight, light heavyweight, and then to middleweight, he completely changed his physique and his body. I'm actually really surprised that his cardio holds out, or it seems to hold out at least. We've seen him in tough round ones, and then he's coming to round two, he's not breathing heavy. This tells me that he's probably got a round two in him. And honestly, with the way he fights and being really reserved and not overexerting himself and throwing bombs into every punch, even though he's got that power, I do think that he'll have a round three in him as well, and he'll be competitive should this fight hit round three. But what really makes Cannonier dangerous, and this is coupling with the cardio, is the fact that he does have that explosive power. He throws in combinations. Sure, he'll use his rangefinder, which will normally be a big right hand, but once he's got his range, he will pop a jab out there. He will throw powerful combinations down the pipe. He'll throw uppercuts, he'll throw hooks, and he doesn't throw like he's loading so much power into his shots, but when they connect, you can tell that they hurt his opponents. And the low kicks as well. The low kicks are phenomenal. He stopped Anderson Silva with low kicks. He completely stifled the movement of Jack Hermansson in his last fight. Hermansson started really fast, in and out of range, shooting for takedowns, 2 or 3 of those low kicks, and instantly you started seeing Hermansson become a little bit depleted. He couldn't really get his movement going, and from that moment he struggled and eventually got finished. This is something that Whittaker's got to be really careful of. But if anyone's going to beat this Jared Cannonier at middleweight, I do think that it is going to be Robert Whittaker, because Whittaker for me is still a phenomenal fighter. Sure, he's not the champion anymore, but look who is the champion, Israel Adesanya, the last guy to beat him. And honestly, I think Israel Adesanya beats everybody, so I don't put too much stock into that at all. I think Robert Whittaker is the more technical fighter in this fight. I think from a striking perspective, how he mixes things up, how he blends his punches to his kicks, and just the combinations that he sets up, I believe that Robert Whittaker is definitely the more technical fighter, and he's the more well-rounded fighter as well. He's the better wrestler. He's the better grappler. But quickly, in regards to that wrestling and grappling, I don't think it's going to play too much of a factor in this fight. I think that Cannonier, although he can be taken down, he's very quick to get back up to his feet. He doesn't lay on his back at middleweight. We saw Jack Manson take him down. We saw Dave Branch take him down. He just doesn't accept that position, and that's something that I really like to see from Cannonier and in fighters in general. Now, for who I think's actually going to win this fight, although I think, and I've said it already, that Robert Whittaker is the more technical striker, the striker that puts things together a little bit more, I do actually think he's going to find himself in trouble in this fight, because the explosiveness and the power of Cannonier, I think, is going to play a big factor in this fight. I think Whittaker might be quite fluid early on for the first minute or couple of minutes, but I think once Cannonier starts landing those really hard leg kicks, once he starts hitting Whittaker with a few hard shots with that right hand, I really do believe that we'll see Whittaker become a little bit more hesitant. And the same thing happened momentarily in the Darren Till fight. Darren Till knocked him down in round one, and from that moment you could see Whittaker was just really hesitant to engage, and so was Darren Till, and neither fighter wanted to go first. Jared Cannonier is going to want to go first in this fight, and Whittaker will counter for sure, but I think once he feels the power of Cannonier, there is going to be some hesitancy set in. And I think once he's hesitant, that'll allow Cannonier to go forward more. Once Cannonier starts going forward more, the strikes will pour on, the volume will be there, and then the power will be there in that volume as well. And I just think the power itself is going to cause Whittaker a lot of problems. There's a good chance that Cannonier finishes Whittaker in this fight, especially if he does connect and follows up with some brutal shots. But if he doesn't knock him out, I do think that he can win a decision as well, just by being the more aggressive fighter, landing the bigger action strikes, and potentially slowing and calming that volume down of Robert Whittaker. And if he does that, his volume might be greater, over 3 rounds, over 15 minutes. So I think with the multiple paths to victory available for Jared Cannonier, I'm picking Cannonier to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're up at heavyweight. We've got Alexander Volkov versus Walt Harris. Volkov currently the minus 155 favourite. The comeback on Harris at plus 135 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I do think that it sits with the favourite in Alexander Volkov. Volkov actually opened the minus 185 favourite. He got steamed up to minus 240, and all that money came back in on Walt Harris. And although I actually agree with that money coming back in on Walt Harris, I do think that the line has come too far, and that's created some value for Alexander Volkov. As for where this line moves, I actually think it's going to fluctuate from this point, because we are at heavyweight. Walt Harris is dangerous. He can land that knockout. We have seen Volkov knocked out late in fights, so he's not always necessarily safe until he's got his hand raised at the end of the fight. So I do think the fluctuation will happen. I think we might see some more money coming back in on Volkov, maybe push him to minus 165, minus 170. But at that point, I think that'll be his brick wall. I think the money will come back in on Harris at that point. And ultimately, I do think we're going to see Volkov close at around minus 150 with Walt Harris at around plus 130. As for how this fight plays out, though, I do think it's going to be a fight that predominantly takes place on the feet. I do think it's a good stylistic fight for Alexander Volkov from both his height, his range, and his skill set in regards to the kickboxing. Walt Harris isn't so much about his legs. He's more about closing the distance, getting his strikes off. He holds power in his hands. I've already touched upon that. So if he does close the distance, get inside and land something on Volkov, we could see Volkov go down. And from that point, it could be all over. But Volkov's a little bit of a different heavyweight fighter. We don't have many fighters like Volkov. Like I say, he's predominantly a kicker. He does like to stick at range. He'll stick on the outside. If you come all the way in, then he can be comfortable on the inside as well. He'll try and tie up with you. He'll land knees. He'll land elbows. He's got that length in his limbs to be a bit of a problem regardless of what range the fight is currently at, but predominantly he will like to be a little defensive, sit on the outside and strike inwards. I think this is where he's got a good stylistic advantage over Walt Harris, because Harris has got to close the distance to come inside to land the shots that he needs to win the fight. And to get inside of a fighter like Alexander Volkov, you've got to have good footwork, smart footwork, be patient, get your reads in, and come in when the time's right. And This is where I think that Walt Harris is going to have problems, because I think the footwork of Volkov is a little better. I think Volkov's a little smarter in regards to selection of strikes and movement as well. And those two things coupled together will allow him to be striking at Walt Harris, while Harris is trying to make all these reads and use his tool set to get inside. I think Volkov is going to be able to land more strikes over 15 minutes should it go to a decision. I also think that the body kicks of Volkov will play a huge factor as well, because once those kicks start slamming into the body of Harris, it will start to affect his gas tank. He will start to feel a little bit depleted. The longer the fight goes on, the harder it'll become for him to actually work hard. And working hard is something that he's going to have to do, as I've already mentioned. Also, working hard will require a decent gas tank in general. So even without the body kicks, I think Harris is potentially going to have issues going late in this fight, going deep in this fight, and keeping a certain amount of pace up. However, with those kicks being added to that equation as well, I really do feel that that's going to play a factor in this fight. And although Harris is going to be dangerous in round one, and honestly, it wouldn't shock me if he knocked Volkov out in that first round either. But if this does hit round two, if this does hit round three, I think from those moments, Volkov will start to take over the fight if he isn't already controlling anyway. And I think that'll allow himself to either get a finish on Harris or win on the scorecards over 15 minutes. So again, multiple paths to victory for Alexander Volkov in this fight. I think he's got a good stylistic fight ahead of him. I'm picking Alexander Volkov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two newcomers. We've got Phil Hawes finally making his UFC debut against Jacob Malkoun. Phil Hawes currently the minus 260 favourite. The comeback on Malkoun at plus 220 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I really don't think that there's too much value. Either way, I think it's one of those fights where Phil Hawes should definitely be favoured to win, but at this big of an underdog, he does strike me as the type of fighter that is possibly in a big letdown spot as a big favourite. Whereas with Jacob Malkoun, I don't think his style, his skill set matches up very well with Hawes, if I'm being honest. And I've also got some doubts about the level of competition that he's been fighting outside of the UFC as well. So for me, I do think that Phil Hawes is the right side to bet if you are betting it. It's just, can you trust Phil Hawes at minus 260? As for where the betting line moves, I do think that we'll see the line close up a little bit. I think we will see Phil Hawes come down. Not too much though. I do think we'll see him at minus 240, maybe even minus 230. But that might be a brick wall at that point. I think people might start seeing money coming in on him. It might push him up a little bit. Ultimately, I don't think that there's going to be too much difference from where we're at right now come fight night on Saturday night. As for how they match up and as for how the fight plays out, I do think Phil Hawes has got a very easy path to victory should he take it, and that's with the wrestling. Hawes is a good wrestler. I don't think he can go too hard early on. I think he's got to just save a little bit of that cardio, reserve a little bit of that energy, and I think he'll be just fine with his wrestling. I think with the wrestling, there's a big gap in skill set here, a big gap in qualities between the two fighters, because if Hawes comes in here with a wrestling game plan, I think that he could win the fight relatively comfortably. I think he is by far the better wrestler. And if he wants to take Malkoun down, I think the opportunities are going to be there for him for sure. The one problem with Hawes is sometimes he does stick to his striking a little longer than what he should, and it can lead him into trouble. His striking isn't too bad, especially from an offensive perspective, but defensively, he can get hit. Volume can start to accrue on him, and that's potentially where Malkoun's path to victory is, because if Malkoun can keep this fight standing, or if Hawes doesn't come into this fight with the wrestling game plan and it predominantly takes place on the feet and is won and lost on the feet, then Malkoun has got a really good chance of winning this fight, because it'll be volume versus the big action power strikes from Hawes. And in that scenario, in this fight, I probably would favour Malkoun a little bit more than what I do now. But ultimately, I do think Hawes is going to come here wrestling. I think he's been on a much longer journey than he anticipated on the road to get to the UFC. He's had multiple setbacks. He was hyped up as the next big thing on The Ultimate Fighter when they were saying he trains with John Jones and he's John Jones's main sparring partner, and then he loses to Andrew Sanchez in the preliminary fights, doesn't even get into The Ultimate Fighter, goes away for a little bit, comes back on the Contender Series, gets knocked out by Julian Marquez, goes away again, comes back onto the Contender Series, finally gets that big knockout win. So it's been a long old road for Phil Hawes. I think he does the sensible thing, goes into this fight and wrestles. So I'm picking Phil Hawes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lauren Murphy versus the newcomer Liliya Shakirova. Murphy's currently the minus 255 favourite. The comeback on Shakirova at plus 215 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, again, like I said in the previous fight, I don't think that there's too much value. For me, Lauren Murphy is definitely rightfully favoured, but laying that minus 255 on her, I'm not too sure. From the opposite side, Shakirova coming into the UFC debut, again questioning the level of competition outside of the UFC. She could be one of those fighters that does just have a legit skill set and look great in the UFC, but ultimately she could be a fighter that comes into the UFC and just doesn't perform and makes it very obvious that the level of competition outside of the UFC was relatively low. As for where the betting line moves, I don't think we're going to be too far away from where we're at right about now come Saturday night. I think that we could see some money coming in on Murphy now at minus 255, but if she hits closer to minus 300, and bear in mind she opened at minus 350, so all that money came back in on Shakirova early on. I do think that if she gets to a very wide line again, that again it'll hit a brick wall, money will come back in on the opposite side, and ultimately will close roughly where we're at now. As for how this fight plays out though, again, watching tape on Shakirova, she actually looks quite decent if I'm being honest. She's predominantly a kicker. When she punches, her punching technique isn't totally there. She does wing the big action strikes opposed to just landing some fundamentals, a nice jab, a jab cross or anything like that. It's the big action strikes with the hands, but with the kick she's well versed. She'll kick to the leg, she'll kick to the head, to the body, she'll spin as well, and she's also got what looks to be a decent double leg takedown as well. But from time to time, mid-air, she can lose control of her opponent. It tends to be more of a throw her opponent to the mat opposed to take her down efficiently and end up in a nice position on top. Other times she does complete the takedowns quite well. And when she does end up on top, she's not totally heavy. She will flow with scrambles. She will always look to stay on top. And she does seem to have that little bit of a magnet for top position as well. So if her opponent tries to roll or scramble out of position, she'll follow the opponent and make sure she's cutting off and blocking any of those defensive transitions. But again, the level of competition is a big concern for me, because is she fighting fighters that she's just a million miles better than? We'll find out on Saturday night, but I have to side with Lauren Murphy. I think the UFC experience, I think the fact that she has fought legitimate women inside the UFC, she's well-rounded, she'll be happy wherever the fight goes. If she's got crazy, flashy, spinning kicks coming at her, I think with the veteran that she is, with the experience that she's got, that she'll be able to handle that sort of style without too many issues. But she's good with her hands, with her boxing. If she does get taken down with one of these double legs from Shakirova, then she's great off her back. She's got good dexterity in her legs. She'll pull up for rubber guard. She'll look for triangles, look for arm bars. I just feel like she's the more well-rounded fighter, the more experienced fighter, and ultimately the fighter that you can trust more in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Lauren Murphy to win this fight. And in the next fight in the light heavyweight division, we've got a great fight, a rematch, and a fight that I feel like I've broken down about 8,000 times at this point. We've got Magomed Ankalaev versus Un Cutelaba. Ankalaev is currently the minus 270 favourite. The comeback on Cutelaba at plus 230 as the underdog. As for where the value is in the betting line, I do think the value sits with Magomed Ankalaev at minus 270. It's really strange though, because in the last two scheduled fights, Ankalaev has been north of minus 300, minus 330, minus 350. So the fact that he's sitting at minus 270 right now really confuses me, because I don't understand how he can be minus 330 in one fight. That fight gets cancelled. Then he's minus 350. That didn't make sense either. That fight gets cancelled, and now he's sitting at minus 270. A little bit of confusion there. I can't answer that, but I think the value's with Ankalaev. As for where the line moves, I actually thought that it'd be much higher than what it is right now, as I've just explained. So I thought the money would be coming back in on Un Cutelaba, pushing the betting line to roughly where it is now. So ultimately, I don't think there's going to be too much change. There might be a little bit of fluctuation throughout fight week, but I'd be surprised to see Ankalaev going in there at minus 300, because I think if it gets to that sort of line, the money will just come in on Cutelaba, pushing it back down. So I think the line will be where it is roughly right about now, come fight night on Saturday. Now, as for how this fight plays out, like I said, I feel like I've broken it down so many times at this point. And it's funny because my breakdown doesn't change every single time that I break this fight down. So anybody that's listened to this podcast will know exactly where I'm leaning, exactly where I'm heading, and how I think it's going to go down. But for any new listeners, I'll break it down once again because I'm just a stand-up guy. I think this is actually going to be a really good fight. I think it'll play out differently to what happened last time. I definitely don't think we're going to get this possum type of performance from Cutelaba where he was pretending that he was injured. I've actually got no sympathy at all for Iwan Cutelaba. I don't blame the referee for stopping the fight. The referee saw Ankalaev hit him with a hard high kick. Cutelaba starts wobbling. The referee thinks he's hurt. Ankalaev goes back in again, lands a couple of punches. Every time he lands, Cutelaba's wobbling. And I think the referee just thought that Cutelaba had had enough and he was saving him to fight another day. It turns out that Cutelaba was just faking that movement. He was faking being hurt, hoping that he would draw Ankalaev in. And once Ankalaev comes in trying to finish Cutelaba, thinking he was hurt, then Cutelaba could just unload on him, potentially catch him with something and put him out. In my opinion, it was a really daft thing to do. But on the other side of the coin, I can understand why he would try to do that at the same time, because I genuinely don't think Iwan Cutelaba beats Ankalaev down the stretch. I think if it gets past the first half a round, or maybe the first round, if we're giving Cutelaba's gas tank a little bit more credit, eventually Ankalaev is going to take over the fight. He is going to find takedowns, or with Cutelaba, assuming he is tired going down the stretch, then Ankalaev can just strike comfortably with him. Ankalaev's a good striker. He's a good wrestler as well, but it just means that he's a good all-round fighter. He can take the fight to the mat should he need to. But on the feet, he's got crisp striking. He doesn't overexert himself. Everything's thrown with purpose. He doesn't waste strikes. And when he lands, he hits hard. And when he connects, he can knock you out. So I honestly think that Iwan Cutelaba's window in this fight is really small. I think he knew that in the last fight, and that's why he was pretending to be hurt in order to bait Ankalaev in to give himself the best chance of knocking Ankalaev out, and also trying to make the most of this small window that he's got. Again, I don't think Ankalaev is going to get caught with something crazy early on. I think Ankalaev is the better technical striker. He's just got to watch out for that power for the first 2.5, 3, maybe 4 minutes. And then from that point, it's up to Ankalaev what he wants to do. He can potentially go in for takedowns, take Cutelaba out, really drain that gas tank, either finish him via strikes or submit him on the mat. I think both will be potential opportunities for him down there. Or if he doesn't even want to exert that far, then he can keep the fight on the feet. He can strike with Cutelaba. Cutelaba will constantly be winging these bombs. The more he wings the bombs, the longer the fight goes on, the more tired he's going to become, the easier the striking gets for Ankalaev as well. I think it's a great stylistic fight for Magomed Ankalaev. He's just got to be careful in those first few minutes. I don't see Cutelaba knocking him out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're back in the heavyweight division. We've got Stefan Struve versus Tai Tuivasa. Struve is currently the minus 120 favourite. The comeback on Tuivasa at plus 100 as the slight underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think that the value sits with Stefan Struve at minus 120. He opened at minus 165. All that money came in on Tai Tuivasa. That trend has been that Tai Tuivasa is going to be the fighter that either finishes Stefan Struve inside the cage or ultimately walks away with the win. I'm not sure that I agree with that at all. I think it's a good fight for Stefan Struve, and the fact that he opened at minus 165 does tell me a lot about where the bookmakers think that this fight should be at, and I actually agree with that as well. As for where the line moves, I've seen a lot of love for Tai Tuivasa. The line's come down a lot as well. It keeps continuing to come down. It's even a pick-em in some spots as well. So I think that trend will continue. I think the betting line will flip, and I think we'll see Stefan Struve at plus money come Saturday night on fight night. As for how this fight plays out though, like I say, I do favour Stefan Struve in this fight. I think for a few reasons. Stylistically, I think he's got an advantage over Tuivasa. I think he's physically got an advantage over Tuivasa. He's taller, he's longer, he's going to be harder to hit. Tuivasa, who, in my opinion, isn't a very technical striker. He's more of a fighter that'll just put together long combinations and look to land something hard. I think that's going to be difficult against someone at 6'11", 7 foot, whatever you want to call it. The more you're punching up, the less power that will be on your punches. So for Tuivasa just to go in there and just knock him out, I honestly don't think it's that likely a scenario. It could happen for sure. It's the heavyweight division, but for Tuivasa to actually get inside and land that bomb, again, similar to how I broke down Volkov and Walt Harris earlier on, I think that you've got to have good footwork, good movement, you've got to get inside, and I just don't think that Tuivasa is going to be able to get inside that easily against Struve to give him the best opportunity of knocking him out. I think Struve is going to be able to keep on the outside. I think if Tuivasa does get close, I think Struve will immediately close that distance even further and clinch up. I think that Tuivasa is going to have a cardio issue here, because he's going to have to work hard, not only chasing Struve round, but trying to get inside as well. And I just think for the first few minutes of this fight, maybe the first round, Tuivasa might keep that work rate up. But I think if this fight goes into the second round, into the third round, if it goes deep, I just don't think he can keep that work rate up for 3 rounds. Again, should he not knock Stefan Struve out in round 1? If Struve ties up with him, takes him down, trips him to the mat and gets on top, then Tuivasa, for me, that's one of his biggest holes in MMA, being on his back. We've seen him exposed there multiple times now. We've seen Struve dominate on top. He's very long. He's very tricky with his submission attempts as well. So he's really difficult to kick off you and escape back up to your feet. I just think that Tuivasa stylistically isn't in a great fight here, because he's got to deal with the length of Struve, and Struve isn't a bad striker. Struve's not a fighter that'll go out there and just be absolutely reckless or wing untechnical strikes himself. He's a good kicker. He's good with his hands. He knows how to use his length, his range, keep distance. And if it does get dangerous for him, tying up with Tuivasa and taking him down, I think is a perfect game plan for him. And I think that actually should be the game plan. Stick on the outside a little bit, close the distance, take Tuivasa down and submit him. I think Struve's got multiple paths to victory in this fight. I'm picking Stefan Struve to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alex Oliveira versus the newcomer Shavkat Rakhmonov. Oliveira is currently the -155 favourite. The comeback on Rakhmonov at +135 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I actually think it's with the underdog Rakhmonov. At +135, I definitely think you've got some value there. He's an exciting fighter, a fighter that could potentially bring back the reckless, exciting Alex Oliveira, which is a fighter that I think is definitely beatable. Obviously, in Oliveira's last fight, that type of fighter wasn't there. It was more crisp. He was sharp. He looked fundamentally great, but that's because he was fighting a fighter that wasn't putting that sort of pressure on. This fight's different. I think there's value against Oliveira in a fighter that fights in the way that Rakhmonov does. As for where the betting line moves, I actually think the line will close up a little bit further. There has been money coming in on Rakhmonov over the last 24 to 48 hours. That's closed the lines quite significantly, but I do think that the lines will close a little bit more. And if it gets to the point where we are seeing Alex Oliveira at -130, -135, again, I think that'll be a brick wall, and I think people will start betting Oliveira. Ultimately, I do think the lines are going to close a little bit from where they're at now, but not too much. As for how this fight plays out, like I said, I think the style of Rakhmonov is going to create a very wild fight in this fight. I think he's going to bring out the Alex Oliveira of old. I think Oliveira is going to look to start being aggressive himself, combating that aggression, that firefight with aggression and firefight himself. Rakhmonov's fun. He'll come forward. He'll throw plenty of punches, throw in combinations, throw volume. He'll mix in kicks as well to the body, to the legs, to the head. And if the takedowns are available, Rakhmonov will look to take a fight to the mat as well. A double leg or a trip or a throw, whatever he can get the fight to the mat with, he'll work towards. But Oliveira is very well-rounded as well. Also a good striker. I don't think he's so great from a technique perspective with his hands, even though he does punch relatively hard. But with his kicks, he's very dangerous. He fights in that sideways karate stance. He can be quite hard to read. But although he's the better fighter in this fight, although he's the way more experienced fighter, fought better competition, There's just something about unbeaten fighters, 12-0. They seem to have this aura about them. And with Rakhmonov being a very wild fighter that will come forward, crash forward, and look to land a barrage of strikes, it will create a fight where if Alex Oliveira accepts that type of fight and fights back with it, which I think he will, then this fight is anybody's fight. And in that scenario, I do favour somebody like Rakhmonov, who's 12-0 at plus money, creating that firefight. He's going to have opportunities to finish the fight. And I don't think Alex Oliveira is a crazy durable fighter in regards to taking heavy amounts of damage. So if Rakhmonov does put it on Oliveira, then we could see a situation where Oliveira accrues a high amount of damage, and at that point we could see the beginning of the end. Ultimately, I like the chances of Rakhmonov in this type of fight. I'm picking Shavkat Rakhmonov to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Un Jung versus Sam Alvey. Jung is currently the minus 345 favourite. The comeback on Sam Alvey at plus 285 as the underdog. As for where the value sits in this fight, I do think that any value is with the favourite in Jung. I think at minus 345, the line is a little steep to start playing it straight, but for sure in parlays, I do think it's going to be one of those parlay pieces that does cash on the night. And as for where the betting line moves, I do think that although we have seen money coming in on Sam Alvey over the last 24 to 48 hours, I do think the closer we get to fight night, the more that number will rise from Jung's perspective. At minus 345 now, I could definitely see that up at minus 360, maybe minus 380, maybe even minus 400. I do think it could warrant that in this particular spot. I don't think it's a great fight for Sam Alvey, and I think he's at this point in his career now where it's looking like wins are going to be harder to come by. As for how this fight plays out though, for those that are new to this podcast and you've never heard anything from me before, I have been called the Sam Alvey Whisperer by others. Basically, I've never lost a bet on Sam Alvey. Once my money's laid on that table on a Sam Alvey fight, no matter what I bet on, it's cashed. Whether that's betting on Sam Alvey, betting against Sam Alvey, betting totals, props, whatever it is. When my money is on a Sam Alvey fight, it cashes 100% of the time. So with that being said, I do think, like I've said at this point, Sam Alvey in his career, wins are going to be harder to come by. It's not so much of a brag or a gloat anymore as what it used to be with Sam Alvey, because he has declined so much so that his performances are reflecting that decline as well. Although he didn't do too badly against Ryan Spann last time out, I do think that was more of Spann having a very off performance than Sam Alvey having a very great performance. Also, Ryan Spann gassed into the second round as well, which didn't help that fight either. But I don't think we're going to see those gas tank issues with Jung. I think we're going to see crisp, sharp striking. I think we're going to see a massive difference in the volume numbers in this fight as well. I think Jung is just going to land so much more than Alvey, who tends to be a little more inactive nowadays. And although he's always been that counter-striker type of fighter, he still put up decent numbers back in his prime, and he had knockout power as well. But like I say, everything just seems to be diminishing just a little bit, and I'm not taking a hard shot on Sam Alvey in this fight. You know, I don't want to come across as disrespectful. The decline hits every professional athlete, whether you're a fighter, whether you're a football player, whether you play baseball or basketball. At some point in your career as an athlete, you are going to decline, and unfortunately that's what's happening with Sam Alvey. He seems like a really good dude and a good dude to be around, but unfortunately being a good dude doesn't win you fights at the end of your career. I do think Jung is going to be the sharper, quicker fighter in this fight. I don't think the fight's going to hit the mat. For a start, Sam Alvey, even in his age now, is pretty much impossible to take down. He's always had that elite takedown defense. I don't think he's going to shoot takedowns on Jung either, and even if he did, I'm not sure he would be able to complete the takedowns and spend enough time on top for this fight to be won and lost on the mat. So I think it's going to be won in the striking realm. I think Sam Alvey is going to have a disadvantage in regards to movement, speed, volume and power as well. I think all those things favour Un Jung. And in that sort of fight, a fight that I think is going to be won and lost on the feet, I'm picking Un Jung to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Liana Jojua versus Miranda Maverick. Miranda Maverick is currently the minus 360 favourite. The comeback on Jojua at plus 300. Now, as for where the value is in this fight, I don't think there's any value at all. I think Maverick is the rightful favourite, but at minus 360, I think the line's really, really steep, and I honestly believe you'd be taking a really big risk laying that amount of chalk on Maverick in this fight. But on the flip side, I'm not massively high on Liana Jojua, and I do think that she'll struggle in her UFC fights where she doesn't have a massive stylistic advantage, which I don't believe she has in this fight. So even at plus 300, I'm not confident that Jojua is going to come out here and get the win over Maverick. So, like I say, I just don't see too much value either side for me. And as for where this betting line moves, I do think if anybody is going to be playing either side here, it's probably going to be those parlays for Maverick. I do think if people are parlaying Maverick in this fight, that line will grow. But honestly, I can't see it growing too much, if I'm being honest. I'd be shocked to see minus 400 or worse on Miranda Maverick. And for that reason, I don't think that the betting lines will move too much come fight night on Saturday night. As for how the fight plays out though, as I've already briefly touched upon, I don't think Jojua has a stylistic advantage over Maverick. And I think that wherever this fight goes, however it plays out, I think Maverick will just have advantages in every single area. I think she's the better striker. Jojua is definitely more of a grappler, a wrestler than she is of a striker. So on the feet, I think Maverick will have some success. She's also a fighter that's improving from fight to fight as well. So that part of the game is only going to be improving. And the more it improves, the more of an advantage she'll have over someone like Jojua. In the wrestling and grappling departments, I also think Miranda Maverick is going to have advantages here as well. I do think that Jojua is going to have a hard time trying to take Maverick down, which I assume will be a game plan. And I think that Maverick is going to be the stronger fighter as well. So that difficulty that Jojua is going to have technically taking her down is going to be doubled with the physicality side of it as well. I just think Miranda Maverick is going to be the much harder fighter to take down. Alternatively, on the flip side, I do think Jojua is a fighter that can be taken down as well. I don't think she's got great takedown defense. I think if Maverick wants this on the mat, if that's a game plan, then Maverick will be able to take her down. Obviously, Maverick does have to be careful in guard. Jojua has shown in previous fights that she's got an ability to submit off her back. She's got some decent dexterity in her legs as well, so she can throw up for those triangles, for those arm bars. Maverick has to be careful whilst she's in guard if she's on top of Jojua. But once she passes, I do think that Maverick can start looking for submission setups herself. I do think she can land some strikes while she's on the mat. And ultimately, I just don't think it's a great fight for Jojua. Like I've already said, on the feet, she's outgunned. I think in the wrestling, she's slightly outgunned. I think the grappling, she's slightly outgunned as well again. So wherever this fight goes, I just think that Maverick will have the advantage, but I don't think it's going to be a significant enough advantage that Maverick's going to go in there and whitewash Jojua. But I do see her getting a hand raised at the end of the night. For those reasons, the paths to victory, the advantages in the areas that I've spoken about, I'm picking Miranda Maverick to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a super fun fight that was put together not so long ago. We've got Casey Kenny versus Nathaniel Wood. Casey Kenny is currently the minus 185 favourite. The comeback on Wood at plus 160 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think that the value sits with Nathaniel Wood as the underdog at plus 160. I'm not as confident in him winning the fight, but in regards to the value, I do think the line's a little wide. I do think it should be much closer considering the skill sets. So plus 160 for Nathaniel Wood, I think that's the right side at this point. As for where the line moves, I actually do think it closes up the closer we get to fight night. I think this line is slightly too wide. I think others will recognise that as well. I think the bookies will be taking some money on Nathaniel Wood throughout fight week, and it wouldn't shock me to see Casey Kenny closing at minus 175, minus 170, with Nathaniel Wood roughly around the plus 150 mark. Now, as for how this fight plays out, like I say, it's a great fight. Stylistically, they're going to clash really well because when it comes to the striking, although Casey Kenny isn't a bad striker by any stretch of the imagination, I do think Nathaniel Wood is the better striker. And then when you look at the wrestling and grappling, although Nathaniel Wood is absolutely capable on the mat, absolutely capable in wrestling as well, I do think that Casey Kenny is the better wrestler and the better grappler, both topside and on bottom as well, and that's going to be important in this fight, because if Nathaniel Wood does start shooting takedowns, then I do think that if he is able to take Kenny down, then Kenny's scrambling ability on the mat is just unbelievable. You know, I'll go back to that Borg fight. I keep going back to that fight when I talk about Casey Kenny and the grappling department, because the amount of times that Casey Kenny got out of bad spots against Ray Borg, spots that other world-class fighters haven't been able to get out of, it really does show you where Casey Kenny is at in regards to his grappling and scrambling ability, which is at a very high level. He's a high level wrestler as well. So again, even though Wood can hang in regards to that wrestling and grappling ability, I do think that Kenny is definitely better in those areas. So for me, you've got Nathaniel Wood, who's the better striker, and then you've got Casey Kenny, who's the better wrestler and grappler. So it's who implements what game plan in this fight. And ultimately, although I do see value on Wood at plus 160, I do think it's Kenny that's going to have those advantages with how this fight plays out, because although there's definitely going to be significant moments on the feet with both fighters striking out in space, closing the distance into boxing range as well, I do think that the fight is going to be won and lost in the wrestling and grappling departments. So if the fight is close on the feet, if the rounds are close, the judges, should it hit that third round, should it hit that decision, the judges will be looking for anything in those rounds to give an edge to that fighter in those particular rounds. And I do think that if Kenny is able to score takedowns, he's going to be able to spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds on top of Wood, maybe even longer. And those moments are probably going to be those round winners. So if this fight goes to a decision, I'm going to assume that we've seen wrestling, we've seen grappling and those moments on the feet as well. And when you put it all together, I just feel that Kenny will come on top in at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. If there is no wrestling or grappling though, I do think Wood's going to have success and I think he'll win the fight. It's just, if Wood's winning the fight on the feet, I just don't see a scenario where Kenny doesn't switch it up and go to his wrestling and his grappling, which is his bread and butter. I don't think Kenny allows himself to get beaten up over 3 rounds on the feet, unless obviously Wood catches him with something early and knocks him out, which is a possibility. We haven't seen it too much, but it's definitely there. Wood's definitely got that capability and that power, should he land clean on Kenny, to cause damage. I just don't see that as a high percentage outcome. So for that reason, I think that if Kenny tests out his striking and starts losing the fight, he's going to switch it up. He's going to start wrestling, trying to take Wood down and spending time in top control, which could be significant in determining the winner of this fight. Ultimately, I think we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight. I think we're going to see plenty of striking, plenty of wrestling, plenty of grappling. It's just, I think that Casey Kenny's wrestling and grappling is better than the striking of Wood. In regards to the gap in skill set of both fighters, I'm picking Casey Kenny to win this fight. And in the final fight of this breakdown, we've got Joel Alvarez versus Alexander Yakovlev. We've got Joel Alvarez, currently the minus 200 favourite, to come back on Yakovlev at plus 170 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog, with Alexander Yakovlev at plus 170. I think the betting line is really, really wide here. I know Alvarez had a great fight last time out against Joe Duffy in a fight where he was a big underdog, but Alexander Yakovlev is not Joe Duffy. I think he's a much tougher fighter at this point, and the fact that Alvarez beat Duffy in the way he did is definitely feeding into this betting line. So the value for me is on the underdog. And as for where the line moves, I do anticipate it closing up. I'd be shocked to see Alvarez hit minus 225, minus 250 in this spot. I really would. I do think it's going to close. I think Alvarez will come out on Saturday night roughly around minus 175, maybe even shorter. As for how the fight plays out, Alvarez did look improved against Duffy, but also you've got to consider that Duffy was at the end of his career. He's now retired. That was his last fight, and he just didn't do enough to be competitive in that fight. And in turn, it made Alvarez look like an absolute world beater. And again, that's what's fed into this betting line. I think this fight is going to be much tougher for Alvarez. I don't think he's going to come out here 100 miles an hour and get away with throwing wild kicks at Yakovlev and have nothing come back at him, throwing volume strike after strike without anything coming back at him. If he does come out fast and hard and really put it on Yakovlev, Yakovlev will just close the distance and try and take him down. And I know that can be tricky against Alvarez because he has good submissions off his back. He has a lot of submissions on his record. You do have to be careful if you're putting Alvarez on his back, but Yakovlev is an absolute veteran at this point. He's got tons of experience, and I'd be shocked if he put Alvarez on the mat and just got himself submitted whilst Alvarez was on his back. I just don't think that's a scenario that's got a high percentage probability outcome. I think Yakovlev is going to have moments in this fight, significant enough moments to win the fight as well. I think in regards to technical striking, he's the better striker. I just don't think he's as wild as Alvarez. Alvarez will come forward. He'll come forward and crash hard against Yakovlev. He doesn't care if he's taken down because he feels comfortable off his back, but I do think he'll care getting taken down if he does, because I think once he realises that Yakovlev is going to be difficult to submit off his back, I don't think he'll be wanting to be on his back again, and that could calm that craziness down on the feet. Again, that will help Yakovlev feel into this fight, and it'll make Yakovlev grow into the fight as well. Ultimately, I think that Alvarez might have a successful first round, but I think the veteran experience and the qualities and the skill set of Yakovlev of just really calming things down and being fundamentally sound and just doing the right things inside the cage to turn the tides. I think those things will help Yakovlev if this fight goes deep into the second, third round, or even a decision. I do think it's going to be a relatively close fight. I don't think it's one of those scenarios where the plus 170 underdog should be a moderately sized favourite or anything like that. The fight is going to be close, but I just think that Yakovlev is the better fighter from a skill set perspective, and he has the more experience and UFC experience as well. At plus 170, I'm going to side with the underdog. I'm picking Alexander Yakovlev to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it. And once again, guys, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to the MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for everybody to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.